Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days, squinting at the setting sun through the haze of smoke rising from the industrial district. The junkyard stretched out before him like a metal graveyard, towering piles of scrapped starship hulls, broken atmosphere processors, and discarded mining equipment creating a maze of shadows in the fading light. He'd inherited this place from his grandfather, along with the small repair shop that barely kept him afloat in a galaxy that seemed to have forgotten about independent mechanics. The war between the Terran Federation and the Draconic Empire had ended 3 years ago, but its scars remained everywhere. Broken ships, abandoned colonies, and refugees from both sides try to rebuild their lives. Marcus had seen enough destruction during his service as a combat engineer to last several lifetimes. Now, all he wanted was peace, quiet, and maybe enough credits to keep his small operation running. He was making his final rounds of the evening when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in his metal sanctuary. It was soft, almost musical, like wind chimes made of crystal. Marcus froze, listening intently. The sound came again, definitely not mechanical, definitely not human. His hand instinctively moved to the plasma cutter on his tool belt as he followed the melody deeper into the junkyard. The sound led him to the far corner of his property, where he kept the really old stuff, pre-war civilian vessels that nobody wanted anymore. There, nestled between the broken hull of an old passenger liner and a pile of atmospheric recyclers, was something that made Marcus question his sanity. A child lay curled up in a makeshift nest of salvaged thermal blankets and shipping container padding. But this wasn't any ordinary child. Even in the dim light of the twin moons, Marcus could see the distinctive features that marked her as draconic. The elongated skull, the ridge of small horns along her brow, and most notably, the delicate wings folded against her back like a cape made of starlight. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old in human terms, though Marcus knew that draconic aging followed different patterns. Her breathing was shallow, and even from a distance, he could see she was malnourished. Her clothes, if the tattered remnants could be called that, suggested she'd been on her own for some time. Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing. Finding a draconic child on Earth was problematic on multiple levels. First, there weren't supposed to be any dragons left in this sector. The peace treaty had included massive population relocations, with most draconic civilians moved to the Outer Rim territories. Second, harboring an undocumented alien could land him in prison, or worse, if the wrong people found out. The smart thing to do would be to contact the authorities. Let the Federation handle it through proper channels. Marcus reached for his comm unit, then stopped. He'd seen how the Federation handled proper channels during the war. The processing centers, the detention facilities, the bureaucratic maze that could lose a person, especially a child, for months or years. The little girl stirred, making that crystal chime sound again. It wasn't speech, Marcus realized, but something more primal, a distress call, maybe, or simply the sound a draconic child made when dreaming. He'd heard something similar during the war, from wounded dragon soldiers calling for their families in their final moments. Against every instinct screaming at him to walk away, Marcus approached slowly. The child's eyes snapped open as a shadow fell across her improvised nest. They were large and golden, with pupils that contracted into vertical slits in the moonlight. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, she scrambled backward, pressing herself against the broken hull behind her. She was afraid, terrified, actually, and that fear hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. He'd seen fear plenty of times during the war, but this was different. This was a child, alone and scared, in a world that had taught her to fear creatures like him. "Hey," Marcus said softly, crouching down to make himself less threatening. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The child tilted her head, obviously not understanding his words. The universal translators that had been common during the war were expensive military tech, not something you'd find in civilian areas. But body language was universal, and Marcus kept his movements slow and non-threatening. He pulled a protein bar from his pocket, emergency rations he always carried while working, and tore open the wrapper. The child's nostrils flared, and he caught a glimpse of her sharp, predatory teeth. Despite her humanoid appearance, dragons were carnivores, and she was clearly hungry. Marcus tossed the bar gently toward her, then backed away several steps. The child eyed him warily, but couldn't resist the food. She snatched it up and devoured it in seconds, licking the wrapper clean with a tongue that was longer and more flexible than human anatomy allowed. "That's all I've got on me," Marcus said, more to himself than to her. "But there's more back at the shop." The child watched him with those unblinking golden eyes, and Marcus felt like he was being evaluated by something far older and more intelligent than her apparent age suggested. Dragons matured differently than humans, he remembered from his military briefings. Their minds developed faster than their bodies, meaning this child might have the reasoning capacity of a human teenager despite her physical appearance. "My name is Marcus," he said, pointing to himself. "Marcus." The child made a series of soft sounds that might have been an attempt at his name, then pointed to herself and said something in the melodious, draconic language. Marcus caught what sounded like Kira in the mix of alien syllables. "Kira," he repeated, and the child's eyes widened in surprise before she nodded enthusiastically. It was a start. Marcus stood slowly, pointing toward the distant lights of his shop. "Food," he said, miming eating. "More food." Kira's eyes followed his gesture, but she didn't move. She was smart enough to understand the offer, but too scared to trust it. Marcus couldn't blame her. If their positions were reversed, if he were a human child lost on a draconic world, he'd be just as cautious. "I'll be right back," Marcus said, backing away toward his shop. "Don't go anywhere, okay?" He jogged back through the junkyard, his mind spinning with the implications of what he'd just discovered. A draconic child, alone on Earth, hiding in his junkyard. How had she gotten here? Where were her parents? And what was he supposed to do about it? The rational part of his mind kept insisting he should contact the authorities. There were protocols for this sort of thing, agencies designed to handle refugee situations. But Marcus had seen how those agencies worked during the war. They were overwhelmed, understaffed, and focused more on containment than care. A draconic child would end up in a detention facility, processed as a potential security risk, separated from any chance of finding her family. By the time he reached his shop, Marcus had made his decision. At least for tonight, he'd take care of her himself. In the morning, he could figure out the next steps. He gathered everything he could think of: more protein bars, a bottle of water, a spare blanket, and a portable heater unit. As an afterthought, he grabbed a small med scanner from his first aid kit. If she was injured, he needed to know how bad it was. When he returned to the corner of the junkyard, Kira was exactly where he'd left her, but she was sitting up now, watching for his return. Her golden eyes tracked every movement as he set down his supplies and activated the portable heater. "Better?" he asked as warm air began flowing from the unit. Kira moved closer to the heat source, her relief obvious. Marcus opened another protein bar and offered it to her directly this time. She took it from his hand carefully, her claws, small but sharp, brushing against his skin without breaking it. She was being deliberately gentle, he realized. Despite her fear, she was trying not to hurt him. While she ate, Marcus activated the med scanner and ran it over her from a distance. The readings made him wince. She was dehydrated, malnourished, and showed signs of exposure. Whatever had brought her here, she'd been on her own for a while. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" Marcus asked, knowing she wouldn't understand, but needing to fill the silence. Kira finished the second protein bar and looked at him expectantly. He gave her the water bottle, and she drank greedily before handing it back with a sound that might have been thank you in her language. The temperature was dropping as the night deepened, and even with the portable heater, Marcus could see Kira starting to shiver. Her wings, which he'd initially thought were just decorative, were actually quite functional. He could see her attempting to wrap them around herself for warmth. "Come on," Marcus said, standing and gesturing toward his shop again. It's warmer inside. This time, Kira seemed more willing to trust him. She gathered the thermal blanket around herself like a cloak and followed him through the junkyard, her bare feet silent on the metal-strewn ground. Marcus noticed she moved with an odd grace, as if gravity affected her differently than it did humans. His shop was a converted shipping container, expanded over the years with additional modules until it resembled a small house. Inside, it was cluttered but clean, filled with the tools of his trade and the modest comforts of a man who lived alone. Kira stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide as she took in her first glimpse of human domestic life. "It's not much," Marcus said, "but it's warm and safe." He led her to the small living area, where a battered but comfortable couch faced a wall-mounted display screen. Kira approached the couch cautiously, running her clawed fingers over the fabric as if she'd never felt anything like it. "Go ahead," Marcus encouraged. "Seat." She perched on the edge of the couch, her wings folded carefully to avoid damage. Marcus draped the spare blanket over her shoulders and stepped back. For the first time since he'd found her, Kira actually looked relaxed. "Hungry?" Marcus asked, miming eating again. Kira nodded eagerly, and Marcus realized his protein bars weren't going to be nearly enough. He checked his kitchen supplies, not extensive, since he usually ate at the diner in town, and found a package of frozen meat and some basic seasonings. Dragons were carnivores, so this would have to do. As the meat cooked, Marcus found himself studying his unexpected guest more carefully. Her features were definitely draconic. The elongated skull, the ridge of small horns, the pointed ears, and those striking golden eyes. But there was something else, something that nagged at the back of his mind. Her proportions weren't quite right for a pure-blood dragon. The wings were smaller than they should be, and her overall build was more delicate than typical for her species. A hybrid, maybe? Marcus had heard rumors during the war of relationships between humans and dragons, though both militaries had strongly discouraged fraternization. The genetic compatibility was limited, but not impossible, and the offspring of such unions were said to inherit traits from both species. The meat finished cooking, and Marcus brought it to her on his least damaged plate. Kira's eyes lit up at the smell, and she dove into the meal with an enthusiasm that told him exactly how long it had been since she'd eaten real food. While she ate, Marcus activated his personal comm unit and accessed the local news feeds. If a draconic child had gone missing, there might be some mention of it. What he found instead made his blood run cold. The headline spoke of increased security sweeps in the outer districts, of a crackdown on illegal alien settlements, of a new hardline faction in the Federation Council calling for stricter enforcement of the relocation treaties. Several dragon families have been arrested in recent weeks, accused of violating their resettlement restrictions. The mood toward dragons, never warm since the war's end, was turning uglier. If he turned Kira over to the authorities now, she wouldn't be processed as a lost child in need of help. She'd be classified as an illegal alien, potentially separated from any family she might have on Earth, and shipped off to one of the overcrowded relocation centers in the Outer Rim. Marcus looked at her, curled up on his couch with the empty plate beside her, finally warm and fed for what might be the first time in days. She'd fallen asleep while he'd been checking the news, her breathing deep and steady. Even in sleep, her hand remained wrapped around the blanket he'd given her, as if she was afraid it might be taken away. He couldn't do it. He couldn't turn her over to a system that would treat her like a problem to be disposed of rather than a child in need of protection. Not when she'd finally found somewhere safe to rest. Marcus settled into the chair across from the couch, watching over his unexpected guest. He had no idea what he was going to do in the morning, no plan for the complications this decision would bring. All he knew was that for the first time since the war ended, he felt like he was doing something that actually mattered. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the metal panels of his shop. But inside, for the first time in years, the silence felt peaceful rather than empty. Kira stirred slightly in her sleep, making those soft crystal chime sounds again, and Marcus found himself smiling. Tomorrow would bring problems he couldn't even imagine yet. But tonight a scared child was safe, warm, and fed. Sometimes that was enough to start with. As he settled back in his chair to keep watch, Marcus began a plan. First, he needed to figure out how she'd gotten here and whether she had family looking for her. Then, he needed to find a more permanent solution than hiding her in his junkyard. And eventually, he'd have to decide whether he was prepared to risk everything to protect a child who, by all legal definitions, wasn't supposed to exist. But those were problems for tomorrow. Tonight, he was content to listen to the soft sounds of peaceful sleep and remember what it felt like to be responsible for something other than his own survival. The dragon child had found sanctuary in the most unlikely place, and Marcus had found a purpose he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was just the beginning of a bond that would challenge everything they thought they knew about loyalty, family, and the true meaning of home. Marcus woke to the sound of metal clanging in his workshop. For a moment, he couldn't remember why he'd fallen asleep in his chair. Then, the events of the previous night came flooding back. He bolted upright, looking toward the couch where Kira had been sleeping. The blanket lay crumpled and empty. "Kira," he called out, his voice hoarse from sleep. The clanging stopped, followed by a small, musical sound that he was beginning to recognize as her attempt at his name. Marcus hurried toward his workshop, finding the dragon child standing amid his tools, her golden eyes wide with curiosity. She'd somehow climbed onto his workbench and was examining a quantum plasma welder with the intensity of a master craftsman. "Careful with that," Marcus said, gently taking the tool from her hands. "It can cut through hull plating." Kira looked up at him and pointed to the welder, then to a damaged circuit board lying nearby. She made a series of sounds in her language, her tone suggesting a question. Marcus stared at her in amazement. She was asking if the tool could fix the circuit board. "You understand what this is?" he asked, holding up the welder. Kira nodded enthusiastically, then pointed to herself and made a complex gesture with her hands, as if she were manipulating something delicate. The meaning was clear enough. She'd used similar tools before. Marcus set the welder aside and pulled out his tablet, quickly accessing the translation software he'd used during the war. It was outdated and limited, but it might help bridge the communication gap. He typed in a simple phrase and showed her the screen. "Where did you learn about tools?" Kira studied the screen intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. After a moment, she pointed to herself, then made a complex series of gestures. She touched her head, pointed to the tools, then spread her hands in a gesture that suggested vastness or many. "You learn from many people." Marcus tried. Kira nodded, then took the tablet from him. Her clawed fingers moved awkwardly over the interface, but she managed to navigate to the voice input function. She spoke a long phrase in Draconic, and the translator struggled to parse it, producing a broken translation. "Father, teacher, machines, fix, people happy gone now." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Her father had been an engineer or mechanic, someone who taught her about fixing things. And now he was gone. The implications were heartbreaking. A child who'd learned to love machinery and repair work from a parent who was no longer there to protect her. "I'm sorry," Marcus said softly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I lost my father too. It hurts." Kira looked up at him, and for a moment, the barriers of language and species fell away. Grief was universal, and she understood his sympathy even if she couldn't fully grasp his words. A sharp knock at the workshop door made them both freeze. Marcus quickly gestured for Kira to hide behind a stack of spare parts, then approached the door cautiously. Through the reinforced window, he could see Sheriff Valdez from the local peacekeeping force, his weathered face set in its usual expression of resigned authority. "Marcus, you in there?" Valdez called out. "Need to ask you a few questions." Marcus's mind raced. Had someone seen Kira? Reported suspicious activity in the junkyard? He forced himself to remain calm as he opened the door. "Morning, Sheriff." What brings you out here so early? Valdez stepped inside, his eyes automatically scanning the workshop. Got reports of unusual energy signatures coming from this sector last night. Federation sensors picked up something that might have been an unauthorized atmospheric entry. Atmospheric entry? Marcus kept his voice carefully neutral. You mean like a ship? Could be. Or it could be debris from one of those old military satellites finally coming down. Valdez's tone suggested he hoped it was the latter. You see anything unusual? Bright lights, impact craters, anything like that? Marcus shook his head. Nothing out of the ordinary. Had the plasma cutter running late last night. Might have registered on sensors if they're sensitive enough. It was a plausible explanation, and Valdez seemed to accept it. The sheriff was a good man, but he was also practical. He didn't enjoy dealing with Federation bureaucrats any more than Marcus did. Well, if you do find any wreckage, make sure you report it before salvaging, Valdez said, heading toward the door. Some of these military types get touchy about proper procedures. After the sheriff left, Marcus waited several minutes before calling Kira out of hiding. She emerged from behind the spare parts, her expression troubled. She'd understood enough of the conversation to know it was about her. It's okay, Marcus assured her. He's gone. But we need to be more careful. Kira nodded, then pointed to herself and made a gesture toward the door, as if suggesting she should leave. The selfless offer from someone so young made Marcus's chest tight. No, he said firmly. We'll figure something else out. He spent the morning teaching Kira basic safety protocols around his equipment while they worked together to clear some of the more dangerous debris from his junkyard. Despite the language barrier, she proved to be a quick learner with an intuitive understanding of how things worked. When she handed him exactly the right tool without being asked or anticipated which component needed adjustment next, Marcus began to suspect her mechanical aptitude went far beyond what her father could have taught her. Around midday, Marcus's comm unit chimed with an incoming call from Elena Rodriguez, who ran the diner in town. Elena had been feeding him since he'd inherited the junkyard, and she had a motherly tendency to worry about his welfare. Marcus, you haven't been in for breakfast in 3 days. Elena's voice crackled through the old speaker. You eating enough out there? I'm fine, Elena. Just busy with a big project. Well, I'm making extra soup today. Come by later, and I'll send some home with you. Marcus glanced at Kira, who was carefully cleaning a set of micro-tools with the concentration of a surgeon. Actually, could you make that a double portion? I'm expecting a guest. There was a pause on the other end. A guest? Marcus, you haven't had a guest since your grandfather died. Who was she? Trust Elena to assume it was romantic. It's not like that. Just someone who needs a place to stay for a while. Well, bring them by for dinner tonight. I want to meet anyone who can get you to be social again. After Marcus signed off, he realized he'd just created a new problem. Elena was curious and observant, and she'd immediately noticed that Kira wasn't human. But the alternative, keeping the child isolated indefinitely, wasn't sustainable either. As the day progressed, Marcus found himself marveling at Kira's adaptability. She learned his daily routines quickly, staying out of sight when customers came by, but emerging to help when they were alone. Her understanding of machinery was genuinely impressive. She could diagnose problems with intuition that took Marcus years to develop, and her small, agile fingers could reach components in tight spaces that would have required dismantling entire assemblies. But it was during the afternoon, when Marcus was struggling with a particularly stubborn fusion coupling, that Kira's true nature began to reveal itself. Frustrated with the rusted component, Marcus was about to use a plasma torch when Kira gently pushed his hand away. She placed her palm against the coupling and closed her eyes in concentration. At first, nothing happened. Then, impossibly, Marcus felt warmth radiating from her hand. The metal began to glow softly, not with the harsh light of a plasma torch, but with something more organic, more controlled. The rust flaked away as the coupling expanded slightly, and when Kira removed her hand, the component was not only clean but somehow renewed, its molecular structure realigned to pristine condition. How did you? Marcus stared at the coupling, then at Kira's hands, which showed no sign of heat damage. How is that possible? Kira looked embarrassed, as if she'd done something wrong. She made a series of apologetic sounds and tried to back away, but Marcus caught her gently by the shoulders. No, it's okay. That was incredible. Can all dragons do that? Kira shook her head, pointing to herself, and making a gesture he interpreted as different or special. She was a hybrid, Marcus realized, but not just genetically. She possessed abilities that neither purely human nor purely draconic individuals could access. The implications were staggering. If the Federation discovered she had these capabilities, she wouldn't just be processed as a refugee. She'd become a research subject, studied, and tested until they understood how her abilities worked. The thought made Marcus sick. As evening approached, Marcus faced his dilemma about Elena's dinner invitation. He couldn't keep Kira hidden forever, but exposing her to someone else, even someone as trustworthy as Elena, felt like an enormous risk. We're going to meet someone, he told Kira as they cleaned up from the day's work. A friend of mine. She's going to wonder who you are. Kira listened intently as Marcus used the translation software to explain the situation. Elena was safe, he assured her, but they needed to be careful about what they revealed. Kira's response, when it came through the translator, was surprisingly mature. I understand hiding. I will be careful. Marcus found an old hooded jacket that was small enough to fit her, though the sleeves had to be rolled up considerably. The hood would hide her distinctive skull shape and horns, and if they were careful about the lighting, her golden eyes might pass for an unusual but human variant. The walk to Elena's diner gave Marcus time to prep Kira on basic human social behavior. She was a quick study, mimicking his posture and gait, though her natural grace made her movements appear almost too smooth. By the time they reached the diner, she'd mastered a convincing human walk. Elena's establishment was a converted cargo hauler, expanded over the years into something resembling a proper restaurant. The evening crowd was light, mostly off-shift workers from the industrial district, and a few travelers passing through. Elena herself was a robust woman in her 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed very little. Marcus, she called out as they entered, and you must be his mysterious guest. Kira stayed close to Marcus's side, the hood pulled low over her face. She practiced saying hello in English during their walk, and she managed to get the word out without her accent being too obvious. This is Kira, Marcus said carefully. She's from out of town. Her family's going through some difficulties. Elena's expression softened immediately. She'd helped enough refugees in her time to recognize the signs of displacement and trauma. Well, you're both welcome here. I've got hot soup and fresh bread waiting. They settled into a corner booth, with Kira positioned so her face remained in shadow. Elena brought them bowls of rich stew that smelled like heaven, and Kira's eyes widened at the sight of so much food. Eat up, sweetheart, Elena said gently. You look like you could use a good meal. Kira managed to use the spoon properly, though Marcus could see her struggling with the unfamiliar utensil. Elena noticed too, but didn't comment, simply bringing a second spoon and quietly demonstrating the proper grip. As they ate, Elena regaled them with local gossip, who was dating whom, which businesses were struggling, the latest complaints about Federation administrators. It was comfortable, normal conversation, and Marcus found himself relaxing for the first time since he'd found Kira. That relaxation shattered when the diner's door chimed, and 3 figures in Federation military uniforms entered. They weren't local peacekeepers. These were military police, the kind who handled security enforcement and deportation orders. Marcus felt Kira tense beside him, her breathing becoming shallow. Under the table, her hand found his, her claws extending slightly in distress. The soldiers were scanning the room methodically, and one of them was carrying a handheld scanner that Marcus recognized as a genetic identifier. Evening, folks, the lead soldier announced. We're conducting routine security sweeps in this district. If everyone could present identification and submit to a brief genetic scan, we'll be out of your way quickly. Marcus's mind raced. There was no way Kira could pass a genetic scan, and her identification, if she had any, would immediately mark her as draconic. They were trapped with nowhere to run and no way to hide what she was. Elena appeared at their table with a pot of coffee, her movements casual, but her eyes sharp. "Officers, you're welcome to coffee while you work. On the house, of course." As she poured, Elena somehow managed to knock over the sugar dispenser, sending white granules scattering across the table and floor. In the commotion of cleaning up, she leaned close to Marcus. "Back exit," she whispered, "through the kitchen. Now." Marcus didn't hesitate. While Elena kept the soldiers distracted with her cleaning efforts and insistent hospitality, he guided Kira toward the kitchen. The back door led to an alley that connected to the old maintenance tunnels beneath the district, passages Marcus knew well from his youth. They made it 50 meters into the tunnel system before they heard the soldiers shouting behind them. The genetic scanner had detected draconic DNA residue at their table, and now the hunt was on. As they ran through the tunnels, Marcus realized their quiet life at the junkyard was over. Kira was no longer just a lost child he was helping. She was a fugitive, and by harboring her, he'd become one too. Whatever came next, there would be no going back to the simple existence he'd built for himself. But as he listened to Kira's determined breathing beside him, saw her keeping pace despite her exhaustion, Marcus found he didn't regret his choice. She was worth fighting for, worth the risk, worth whatever consequences lay ahead. The dragon child had brought purpose back to his life, and now that purpose had become a mission. Keep her safe, no matter what it cost him. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer, but ahead lay the vast underground network that honeycombed the industrial district. Marcus knew these tunnels better than any off-world soldier ever could. If they were going to survive, if they were going to find a way to build a real life together, it would start here in the darkness beneath the city with nothing but their determination and their growing trust in each other. The maintenance tunnels beneath the industrial district formed a labyrinth that Marcus had explored as a teenager, back when his biggest worry was avoiding his grandfather's chores. Now, 20 years later, those forgotten passages had become their lifeline. The sound of pursuit had faded an hour ago, but Marcus kept them moving deeper into the network, following maintenance lights that flickered with failing power cells. Kira had kept up without complaint, her enhanced physiology allowing her to match his pace even in the cramped tunnels. But now, as they paused at a junction where 4 passages met, Marcus could see exhaustion in her golden eyes. The stress of discovery and flight was taking its toll on both of them. "We can rest here for a while," Marcus said, activating a small light stick he'd grabbed from his toolkit during their escape. The pale illumination revealed a maintenance chamber large enough for them to sit without bumping their heads. Kira settled against the curved wall, her breathing gradually slowing to normal. She pulled out the translation tablet, which had somehow survived their hasty flight, and typed carefully, "Elena, danger, because help us?" The concern in her broken English made Marcus's chest tight. Even after everything she'd been through, she was worried about someone else's safety. "Elena's smart," Marcus assured her. "She's dealt with Federation searches before. She'll be fine." But privately he worried. Elena had risked herself to help them escape, and if the military police connected her to their disappearance, she could face serious consequences. The Federation's current administration didn't look kindly on those who aided illegal aliens. Marcus accessed his comm unit, carefully routing through several proxy servers to avoid detection. Elena had taught him this trick years ago. She'd helped more refugees than anyone realized, and she'd learned to communicate securely. His message was simple. "Thank you. Are you safe?" The reply came quickly. "All clear. They think you slipped past them in the crowd." Lying low recommended. Relief washed over Marcus, followed immediately by the realization that Elena had just confirmed she was part of an underground network. He'd known her for years and never suspected she was involved in refugee smuggling operations. We need a new plan, Marcus said aloud, as much to organize his own thoughts as to inform Kira. We can't go back to the junkyard. It'll be watched. Kira typed on the tablet. I go alone. Not your problem. No. Marcus's voice was firmer than he'd intended. We're in this together now. Besides, you're just a kid. You shouldn't have to handle this alone. Kira's response surprised him, not child mind. Hybrid, grow different. Think older. Marcus studied her face in the pale light. He'd suspected she was more mature than her apparent age suggested, but hearing it confirmed made him reassess everything about their situation. She wasn't just a lost child. She was a young person with adult reasoning capabilities, trapped in a child's body by her unique genetics. How old are you really? He asked. Kira held up both hands, fingers spread, then added 3 more fingers. 13, but with the mental development of someone much older. It explained her mechanical aptitude, her quick grasp of complex situations, and her mature responses to danger. And your father? Marcus prompted gently. Kira's expression grew sad. She typed slowly. Father, human engineer. Mother, dragon, thermal specialist. Both worked fusion research. Station 7. Station 7. Marcus remembered it from the war, a joint research facility that had been developing next-generation fusion technology when the fighting broke out. It had been destroyed early in the conflict, all personnel listed as casualties. They died in the war. Kira shook her head, typing rapidly. Escape before station destroyed. Lived hidden until 3 months ago. Raiders found us. Parents fought, told Miran. The picture became clearer. Her parents had been war refugees, hiding on the fringes of civilized space with their hybrid daughter. When raiders, probably slavers or pirates, had discovered them, her parents had sacrificed themselves to give her time to escape. How did you get to Earth? Marcus asked. Stowaway cargo ship. Parents taught me ship's engines. Easy hide. Marcus marveled at her resourcefulness. She'd traveled across half the galaxy, hiding in cargo holds and maintenance shafts, surviving on whatever food she could scavenge. The fact that she'd made it to Earth alive was nothing short of miraculous. A distant sound echoed through the tunnels, metal footsteps on grated flooring. Someone else was down here, moving with purpose rather than the random patterns of maintenance workers. Marcus killed the light stick and pulled Kira deeper into the chamber. They pressed against the curved wall, listening as the footsteps drew closer. Voices became audible, human, speaking in low, urgent tones. Genetic traces lead this way. Can't have gotten far. Reward for information on hybrid location. Bounty hunters. Marcus felt sick. The Federation must have posted a reward for Kira's capture, which meant every mercenary and opportunist in the sector would be looking for her. The footsteps passed their hiding spot and continued down another passage. Marcus waited several more minutes before reactivating the light stick, keeping it dimmed to minimal visibility. We need to get out of these tunnels, he whispered. They're going to search systematically until they find us. Kira nodded, then typed, No place safe? Friends. Marcus thought about his limited social circle. Most of his contacts were local, people who couldn't help without exposing themselves to Federation scrutiny. But there was one possibility, someone he hadn't spoken to in years, but who might be willing to help. Maybe, he said, but it means trusting someone I haven't seen since the war ended. Kira looked at him expectantly, and Marcus found himself explaining about Commander Sarah Chun, his former commanding officer during his service as a combat engineer. Chun had been cashiered out of the military after the war for what official reports called conduct unbecoming an officer. Unofficially, she'd been court-martialed for refusing orders to destroy a Dragon civilian shelter during the final offensive. She runs a salvage operation in the outer system now, Marcus told Kira. If anyone would help us, it's her. But getting there means leaving Earth, probably for good. Kira considered this, then typed, You lose everything for me. Why? It was a question Marcus had been asking himself since the moment he decided not to turn her over to the authorities. The honest answer was complicated, part moral obligation, part loneliness, part recognition of something valuable that needed protecting. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because you remind me that there are still things worth fighting for." Kira studied his face for a long moment, then reached out and gently touched his hand. Her claws were retracted, her palm warm against his skin. It was a gesture of trust and gratitude that transcended language barriers. Marcus checked his comm unit for orbital traffic schedules. There were 3 ships leaving Earth system in the next 24 hours. A military transport, obviously not an option. A commercial passenger liner, too much security. And an independent cargo hauler called the Stellar Drift. The Stellar Drift was listed as carrying industrial equipment to the outer colonies. Marcus recognized the ship's registration. It belonged to Tom Bradley, a smuggler who'd done occasional business with his grandfather. If Bradley was still running the same operation, he might be willing to take on undocumented passengers for the right price. "We need to get a landing Bay 7 before the Stellar Drift departs tomorrow evening," Marcus told Kira. "That's our ticket off Earth." The landing bay was 15 kilometers away, across the most heavily patrolled section of the city. Moving during daylight would be suicide, but waiting another day meant risking discovery in the tunnels. Kira had been listening to their conversation, and now she typed, "Help. Powers, hide us." Marcus remembered her ability to manipulate metal at the molecular level. If she could extend that talent to other applications, she might be able to mask their energy signatures or create diversions. "What exactly can you do?" he asked. Kira's response required several messages. Heat control. Metal fix change. Energy hide little bit. Not strong yet. Still learning. It was more than Marcus had dared hope for. If she could manipulate their thermal signatures, they might be able to avoid detection by the military scanning equipment. They spent the next hour planning their route, using Marcus's knowledge of the city's layout and Kira's growing understanding of human security procedures. The journey would take them through industrial zones, residential districts, and, finally, across the heavily monitored spaceport perimeter. As they prepared to leave the relative safety of the tunnels, Marcus realized how much had changed in just 2 days. He'd gone from a solitary junkyard owner to a fugitive protector of an impossible child. His old life was gone forever, and the future was uncertain at best. But as he watched Kira carefully pack the translation tablet and check her makeshift traveling gear, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. She was remarkable, not just for her unique abilities, but for her resilience, intelligence, and capacity for trust despite everything she'd endured. "Ready?" he asked. Kira nodded, pulling her hood up to hide her distinctive features. Together, they moved toward the tunnel exit that would take them back to the surface. The night was clear, with Earth's twin moons providing enough light to navigate by, but not enough to expose them to casual observation. Their first challenge came immediately. A military checkpoint had been established at the tunnel exit, with soldiers scanning everyone who emerged. Marcus and Kira retreated deeper into the tunnel system, looking for an alternative route to the surface. They found it in an old waste processing facility, long since automated and rarely visited by human workers. The access shaft was narrow and filthy, but it emerged in an alley behind a shuttered factory complex. Kira's enhanced agility made the climb easy for her, while Marcus struggled with equipment and fatigue. Once on the surface, they moved through the shadows between buildings, following a route that avoided main thoroughfares and known surveillance nodes. Kira's ability to sense energy signatures proved invaluable. She could detect patrol drones minutes before they came into view, giving them time to find cover. Their first major obstacle was the residential district, where Federation patrols were conducting house-to-house searches. Marcus watched from a rooftop as soldiers questioned residents, checking identification and scanning for genetic markers. The operation was massive, involving hundreds of personnel and sophisticated detection equipment. "They're really serious about finding you," Marcus whispered to Kira. Her response was grim, hybrid, dangerous to them. "Proof, humans. Dragons, not enemies." Marcus understood. In a galaxy still divided by the aftermath of interspecies war, Kira represented something that undermined the fundamental narrative of irreconcilable differences between humans and dragons. Her very existence challenged the assumptions that had justified years of conflict. They skirted the residential zone by moving through abandoned industrial areas, places where environmental damage from wartime bombing had made the land unsuitable for development. The radiation levels weren't dangerous to humans for short-term exposure, but they interfered with scanning equipment, providing natural cover from electronic surveillance. It was in one of these ruined factories that they encountered other refugees. A family of humans, parents, and 2 small children were hiding in the basement of a collapsed manufacturing plant. They'd been displaced by the security sweeps, their identification papers confiscated on suspicion of forged documentation. Marcus's first instinct was to avoid contact, but the children were sick from exposure and contaminated water. Kira saw them first, her enhanced senses picking up their distress from a distance. "Help," she typed on the tablet, pointing toward the hidden family. Marcus wanted to say no. Every additional contact increased their risk of discovery. But when he saw the children, barely older than Kira appeared to be, he couldn't walk away. Using his emergency medical supplies and Kira's thermal manipulation abilities, they managed to break the children's fevers and purify enough water to prevent further dehydration. The grateful parents offered to share their meager food supplies, but Marcus declined, knowing they needed every scrap for their own survival. As they prepared to leave, the father grabbed Marcus's arm. "There are safe houses," he whispered urgently. "Underground network. Elena Rodriguez can put you in contact." So Elena's operation was larger than Marcus had suspected. The knowledge was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because help might be available, terrifying because it meant the situation was serious enough to require an organized resistance. They reached the spaceport perimeter as the sun was beginning to rise. The stellar drift was visible on Landing Pad 7, a battered but space-worthy cargo hauler that looked exactly like the kind of ship that might take on questionable passengers for the right price. The challenge now was getting aboard without being detected by port security. Marcus studied the patrol patterns, noting gaps in coverage and blind spots in the surveillance grid. It would require precise timing and a significant amount of luck. "This is it," Marcus told Kira as they crouched behind a maintenance shed, watching the final preparations for the stellar drift's departure. "Once we board that ship, there's no going back to Earth." Kira looked at him seriously, then typed her response, "Earth never home for me. But you losing your home for me." Marcus thought about his junkyard, his simple life, the routine that had kept him grounded since the war ended. All of it was gone now, probably forever. But as he looked at Kira, this remarkable young person who'd somehow found him in a galaxy full of hiding places, he realized he wasn't losing his home. He was finding a new one. "Let's go," he said, and together they began their final approach to the stellar drift and whatever lay beyond Earth's atmosphere. The cargo bay of the stellar drift smelled like recycled air, machine oil, and something Marcus couldn't quite identify, but suspected was probably illegal. Captain Tom Bradley hadn't changed much in the 5 years since Marcus had last seen him. Still weathered, still suspicious, and still willing to bend rules for the right price. Passage to the Epsilon sector. No questions asked, no records kept, Bradley said, counting the credits Marcus had transferred to him. "But if Federation patrol ships start sniffing around my cargo, you two become very expensive ballast." "Understood." Marcus nodded, though privately he hoped it wouldn't come to that. Beside him, Kira kept her hood pulled low, but her golden eyes tracked every detail of the ship's interior with the intensity of an engineer assessing a new system. "Cargo hold 3 is yours until we clear Federation space," Bradley continued, leading them through corridors lined with pipes and conduits. "Keep quiet, stay out of my crew's way, and try not to touch anything that looks important." The cargo hold was cramped but functional, filled with legitimate industrial equipment that served as cover for whatever Bradley was really smuggling. Marcus and Kira found a space between two massive atmospheric processors where they could set up their temporary quarters without being visible to casual inspection. As the stellar drift lifted off from Earth, Marcus felt the familiar sensation of artificial gravity compensating for acceleration. Through a small porthole, he watched his home planet shrinking away until it was just another point of light against the star field. The finality of it hit him harder than he'd expected. "Okay," Kira asked, having noticed his expression. "Yeah," Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure. "Just saying goodbye." The first 3 days of their journey passed quietly. Bradley's crew was professional and incurious, focused on their duties and whatever profitable ventures awaited them in the outer colonies. Marcus used the time to work with Kira on her English, while she taught him basic Draconic phrases using the translation software. Her language was beautiful when spoken properly, musical and flowing, with subtle harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't quite reproduce. But Kira was patient with his attempts, encouraging him when he managed to approximate the sounds correctly. It was during one of these language lessons that the ship's alarm klaxons began wailing. Federation patrol ship requesting permission to board for routine inspection, came Bradley's voice over the ship's comm system. "All passengers report to designated hiding spots immediately." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Routine inspections weren't routine. They were looking for something or someone specific. Most likely them. "Hide," he told Kira urgently, but she was already moving toward a maintenance access panel she'd identified on their first day aboard. The hiding space behind the panel was barely large enough for one person, let alone two. Marcus was about to suggest they find separate hiding spots when Kira grabbed his hand. "Together," she said firmly in English. The space was impossibly tight, forcing them to press against each other in the darkness behind humming machinery. Marcus could feel Kira's warmth, hear her controlled breathing as she tried to calm herself. Her presence was oddly comforting despite their terrifying situation. Through the thin bulkhead, they could hear boots on metal flooring as the Federation inspection team swept through the ship. Voices became audible as the searchers approached their cargo hold. "Genetic scanners picking up traces of non-human DNA," someone reported. "Could be anything," another voice replied. "Half the cargo ships in this sector carry exotic materials. Focus on passenger compartments." Marcus held his breath as scanning equipment passed just meters from their hiding spot. Beside him, Kira was doing something. He could feel heat radiating from her skin as she concentrated. The scanning beeps grew fainter, as if the equipment was having difficulty penetrating the area around them. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the searchers moved on. They remained hidden until Bradley's voice came over the comm, announcing that the patrol ship had departed. "That was incredible," Marcus whispered as they emerged from the maintenance space. "You somehow masked our signatures." Kira looked exhausted from the effort, but she managed a weak smile. "Heat energy bend around us. Father taught me. Emergency only." Her abilities were clearly more sophisticated than Marcus had realized. The implications were staggering. If she could learn to control thermal and energy patterns with that level of precision, she could potentially interface with almost any technology in the galaxy. But the close call had rattled both of them. They were still fugitives, still hunted, and their presence endangered everyone who helped them. The remainder of their journey to the Epsilon sector passed without incident, but Marcus spent the time planning their next moves. Commander Chin's salvage operation was based on Kepler Station, a civilian facility in the Outer Rim where Federation authority was more theoretical than practical. If they could reach Chun, she might be able to help them find a permanent safe haven. Kepler Station turned out to be exactly what Marcus expected, a ramshackle collection of modules and docking bays that had grown organically over the decades as various groups added their own sections. It was the kind of place where people came to disappear, where authorities asked few questions as long as taxes were paid, and major violence was avoided. Chin's operation was located in Section C, down a corridor lined with shops selling salvaged equipment and services of questionable legality. The sign above her office read, Stellar Recovery Solutions, in faded letters. Marcus knocked, and the door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair and scars that spoke of a hard life since leaving military service. Sarah Chun looked older than Marcus remembered, but her eyes still held the same sharp intelligence that had made her an exceptional officer. Marcus Reed, she said after a moment of study, I heard you'd inherited your grandfather's junkyard. What brings you all the way out here? I need help, Marcus said simply. And I think you're one of the few people who might understand why. Chin's expression grew cautious, but she stepped aside to let them enter. Her office was functional rather than comfortable, filled with salvage manifests, star charts, and the kind of equipment needed to operate in the lawless regions of space. Kira had remained silent during the introduction, but now Chun was studying her with professional interest. Let me guess, Chin said. You found something the Federation wants back. Marcus made a decision to trust her completely. Not something. Someone. He explained everything. Finding Kira in his junkyard, her unique abilities, their flight from Earth, and their need for sanctuary. Chun listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. When Marcus finished, Chun turned to Kira. Pull back your hood, she said gently. Kira looked to Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. She lowered her hood, revealing her distinctive draconic features. Chin's eyes widened slightly, but her voice remained calm. You're a hybrid, Chin said. I've heard rumors, but I've never seen one before. Are you going to turn us in? Marcus asked. Chin laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Marcus, I've been running refugees and political dissidents out here for 3 years. The Federation, and I don't exactly see eye to eye on anything. She stood and walked to a wall display showing star charts of the Outer Rim territories. The problem is, you two have become high-profile fugitives. There's a significant reward for information leading to your capture, and that kind of money makes people do stupid things. What do you suggest? Marcus asked. Disappear completely. New identities, new ship, new life in a place where the Federation doesn't have jurisdiction. Chin turned back to them. I can arrange it, but it won't be cheap and it won't be comfortable. What kind of life? Kira asked, her English clear enough for Chun to understand. Frontier colony world, probably. Somewhere they need skilled engineers more than they care about paperwork. Chun looked at Marcus. You still remember how to build things from scratch? I think so. And she said to Kira, those abilities of yours could be very valuable in the right situation. Thermal manipulation, molecular repair, there are mining operations that would pay well for that kind of talent. Over the following days, Chun put together an identity package that would allow them to disappear into the outer colonies. Marcus became Michael Harrison, a freelance engineer with an impeccable work record. Kira became Kira Harrison, his adopted daughter from one of the war-ravaged border worlds. The documentation was expensive and required calling in favors from various underground contacts, but it was thorough. They would have citizenship papers, work permits, and even a fabricated history that would pass most background checks. There's a colony ship leaving for the Centauri frontier in 2 weeks, Chin told them as she handed over their new papers. The Harmony's End. They're setting up mining and terraforming operations on a world called New Haven. It's rough, dangerous work, but they don't ask many questions about people's past. The waiting period was tense, but productive. Marcus spent time with Chin's technical staff, refreshing skills he hadn't used since his military service. Kira worked with the station's engineers, learning to apply her abilities to practical problems while being careful not to reveal their full extent. It was during this time that Marcus realized how much their relationship had evolved. Kira was no longer just a refugee child he was protecting. She was becoming a partner, someone whose unique perspective and abilities complemented his own skills. When they worked together on technical problems, they achieved results that neither could have managed alone. The night before their departure, as they sat in their temporary quarters aboard Kepler's station, Kira asked him a question that had been weighing on both their minds. New life together, but were we family? Marcus considered the question seriously. They weren't related by blood, weren't the same species, and had known each other for less than a month. But they'd been through trials that had forged bonds stronger than most families ever experienced. "We're whatever we choose to be," Marcus said finally. "If you want us to be family, then that's what we are." Kira smiled, the first truly happy expression Marcus had seen from her since finding her in his junkyard. "Family," she said, testing the word. "I like that." The Harmony's End was a converted military transport, stripped of weapons and refitted for civilian colonization duty. The passenger compartments were Spartan, but functional, designed for people who were leaving their past behind to build something new. Marcus and Kira found themselves sharing space with engineers, technicians, farmers, and various other professionals willing to risk everything on a frontier world. The diversity was remarkable. Humans from a dozen different worlds, a few non-human species that had allied with the Terran Federation, and even some former military personnel looking for a fresh start. As the ship entered hyperspace for the 3-week journey to New Haven, Marcus stood at an observation port watching the stars stretch into lines of light. Kira joined him, her reflection visible in the transparent aluminum beside his own. "Scared?" she asked. "Terrified," Marcus admitted, "but also excited. We get to build something together, something that's ours." The journey to New Haven gave them time to plan their new life. Marcus would work as a general engineer, helping to establish the colony's infrastructure. Kira would assist him officially, while gradually revealing her abilities as they became useful to the colony's development. They spent hours studying technical manuals for terraforming equipment, learning about the challenges they'd face on a world that was still in the early stages of atmospheric modification. It would be hard work, probably dangerous, but it would be honest work building something positive. When the Harmony's End finally dropped out of hyperspace above New Haven, Marcus got his first look at their new home. The planet was beautiful in its harshness. Red deserts broken by green valleys where terraforming had taken hold, with scattered settlements connected by the thin lines of transport corridors. "It looks like possibility," Kira said, pressing her face against the observation port. Marcus understood what she meant. New Haven wasn't just a world. It was a chance to become who they wanted to be rather than what circumstances had forced them to be. The colony's landing coordinator was a practical woman named Director Santos, who cared more about skills than backgrounds. She reviewed their documentation quickly, assigned them to Engineering Team 7, and handed them the keys to a prefabricated habitat module. "Welcome to New Haven," she said. "Try not to die in your first week. We have a lot of work to do." Their new home was small, but comfortable, with space for both of them and a workshop where Marcus could practice his trade. The habitat was located in Settlement 3, a growing community focused on mining operations in the nearby mountain range. On their first morning as colonists, Marcus and Kira stood on the settlement's main street, watching the sunrise paint the alien landscape in shades of gold and crimson. The air was thin but breathable, with a faint metallic taste that spoke of the ongoing terraforming process. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. Kira took a deep breath, her enhanced senses processing information about their new environment. "It feels like home," she said finally. That afternoon, they reported for their first day of work with Engineering Team 7. The team's project was ambitious, establishing a geothermal power station that would provide energy for the growing settlement. It was exactly the kind of challenge that required both conventional engineering and creative problem-solving. When the team leader explained that they were having trouble with thermal regulation in the planet's unstable geological conditions, Marcus and Kira exchanged a meaningful look. This was their chance to contribute something unique to their new community. "I might have some ideas about thermal management," Marcus said carefully. "My assistant here has some unusual insights into heat distribution systems." Over the following weeks, Kira's abilities proved invaluable to the project. She could sense thermal anomalies that conventional equipment missed, identify optimal locations for geothermal taps, and even help stabilize the energy flow when the system experienced fluctuations. Her contributions were attributed to innovative engineering techniques and sophisticated sensor equipment that Marcus claimed to have developed. The fiction was easier to maintain than the truth, and it allowed Kira to use her gifts openly while maintaining their new identities. As the seasons passed on New Haven, Marcus watched Kira grow into her role as both his technical partner and adopted daughter. She was learning to balance her unique heritage with the practical needs of colonial life, developing skills that complemented her natural abilities. The colony itself was thriving, with new settlers arriving regularly and the terraforming process accelerating ahead of schedule. Engineering Team 7 had become one of the most successful groups on the planet, and their geothermal power system was being replicated at settlements across New Haven. One evening, as they sat outside their habitat watching the alien stars emerge in the darkening sky, Kira asked Marcus a question that surprised him. "Do you miss Earth?" Marcus thought about it seriously. He missed Elena's diner, missed the familiar chaos of his junkyard, missed the simple routine of his old life. But he didn't miss the loneliness, the sense that he was just marking time until something real happened. "I miss pieces of it," he said finally. "But this feels more like living than anything I did there." Kira nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. They had both lost their original homes, his to choice, hers to tragedy, but they had found something better, a place where they belonged, work that mattered, and most importantly, a family that had chosen each other. The dragon child who had been sleeping in a junkyard was now a confident young engineer helping to build a new world. The lonely mechanic who had been hiding from life was now a father and mentor contributing to something larger than himself. Neither of them could have predicted this outcome when Marcus first found Kira curled up among the salvaged thermal blankets. But sometimes the best destinations were the ones you never planned to reach, and the most important family was the one you created through choice rather than chance. As the twin moons of New Haven rose over the settlement, casting silver light on the growing community they had helped to build, Marcus realized that home wasn't a place you found. It was something you created with the people who mattered most. The junkyard on Earth was a memory now, but the bonds forged in that metal maze of discarded dreams had become the foundation for something beautiful and new. A human and a dragon child building tomorrow together under alien stars, proving that family was stronger than species and love was more powerful than fear. Their story was just beginning, and the future stretched out before them like an uncharted star map, full of possibilities waiting to be discovered.